Welcome to episode number 21 of this Ocean Life podcast. I'm your host, Josh Peterson. And today we have Nick Dana, professional sailor who has competed multiple years in the most legendary of world-class sailing races, the Volvo Ocean Race. Now, Nick shares his stories of competing in this round-the-world, multi-month event and pushing his physical and mental limits in the harshest ocean conditions on Earth, including Cape Horn, Southern Ocean. Nick shares some stories of being in a storm at night when it's snowing and flying down the faces of 50-foot waves with 50-knot winds. So some pretty amazing things here. And we hear how Nick grew up in the ocean of New England and quickly carved out a place for himself within the ranks of the best sailors in the world to build an incredible sailing career. Thanks for sharing Nick's Ocean Life with us. This episode is sponsored by Kaletka Undersea, an ocean lifestyle company born from thousands of hours spent roaming in and under the sea. A family-owned company, Kaletka delivers high-quality t-shirts and hats representing memorable scenes and animals in the ocean. Visit them at Kaletka, KALLETKA.com. Enjoy the humble pursuit. Now, let's get into the ocean life of Nick Dana. Hey, Nick, welcome to the show today, man.
Thanks very much for having me.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to talking with you. I found you on Instagram as I was just sort of sleuthing around like I always do and saw like big boats with huge water splashing over, and it just looked pretty gnarly. So I can't wait to hear what you're up to today.
Well, today I'm packing. Tomorrow I'll probably be in one of those boats, but yeah, I got a few flights to get there.
Right on, man. So, checking you out, you have a lot of different sort of dimensions, as I call it, I guess, to, your ocean life. You're surfing, you're catching fish, you're working, restoring boats, a lot of cool stuff you're sharing, but then you're sailing a lot and you're a professional sailor. So if you would start us there, man, what are you doing today with the Volvo Ocean Race? And just talk about that, what you're up to right now in that gnarly event.
Well, the Volvo has actually just ended. It ended in July, and that was the end of basically a 2-year campaign. And the way the Volvo works is it's every 3 years. It's kind of a changing goalpost right now because the race has been sold. Oh. Volvo was the underwriting sponsor of it, but basically they've been sold. They're going to change the class again every few years. The whole paradigm of the race kind of has to evolve, and a lot of it's based on what's best for the race in terms of the best style of racing without too much breakage, which, these boats, when you're pushing the upper limits of speed and performance, they tend to break a lot. So to condense this down into a small explanation, the last Volvo was the 2017-2018 Volvo Ocean Race. That is a 10-stop race, 9-month, 10-stop race around the world. Wow. And you essentially are averaging probably 18 days out at sea and then a couple weeks when you get to shore at the stopovers, in which you have a full shore crew that, is just like a pit crew in F1 or NASCAR. We get in, these guys are the technicians, they fix the boat and then get us ready for a hard start day in which all the boats set off again together.
Right. And so what boat are you on and what role, like what's your position on that boat?
So the team that I was on, again, the race ended in July. So yep. it's that story is over, but I was on a team called Vestas 11th Hour Racing, which was a team that was co-sponsored kind of 50-50 from Vestas Wind Turbines out of Denmark and 11th Hour Racing, which is a ocean sustainability foundation led by the Schmidt family, as in Wendy and Eric Schmidt of Google.
Yep.
And basically, it was a good synergy between those two sponsors in promoting ocean health and promoting sustainability. So they decided to come together and sponsor a team, and we kind of emulated that message as we went around the world,
right,
in a variety of ways.
Yeah, and that seemed kind of a theme as I was checking out the Volvo in general. Sustainability seemed to be a really big part or theme of that race, just in general across all the different boats.
Yes, and that's largely due to 11th hour racing. They made a hard push at the beginning of the race, and it really was able to transcend through all the teams and the organization. And it was actually probably that's my fourth race of being involved in. I've been doing the Volvo now for better part of 11 years.
Wow,
and that was probably the coolest new side of the race that I had never seen and never really learned about. And I think it really hit home for everybody because we spend our lives out there.
Yeah.
And to actually learn all these things about ocean health and about sustainability is pretty powerful when you spend night and day out there.
Oh, I bet, man. And it's cool because it could that event could just be about like sponsorship notoriety, but there's, like you said, that sustainability aspect. And then one of the boats, I don't have a name in front of me. They were basically collecting water samples to measure levels of microplastics all around the oceans, and then returning that data for scientists to look at. So, I mean, that's just really cool that, Volvo took the opportunity to leverage some science and do some good with the event.
Yeah, there was a lot of different factors. I mean, even it sounds kind of trivial, but the biggest one that I noticed was that we eliminated plastic water bottle use, which used to be a huge issue in our sport because you're constantly traveling around in 40-foot shipping containers. Each team. And this is not only in the Volvo, this is in every other facet of professional sailing. Your lives are spent in 40-foot shipping containers, whether you have 4 or 8 of them, but everything's modular. Everything, has to be broken down, shoved in a container and shipped to the next spot. And plastic water bottles are always the most convenient thing.
Yeah.
And, when you go 2 years without essentially using any plastic water bottles in an entire race, and then somebody tallies up the number at the end, it's pretty impressive.
That's cool. That's way cool. So so on Vestas, what you were the captain. So talk about the roles and what role you played, day to day out there.
So my role on board is I was the bowman and the boat captain. Now, the way these boats are set up it's actually very militaristic in how the hierarchy runs. Everybody knows their place, and everybody is, obviously able to speak their mind and from a performance standpoint, insert. But when things start to get hairball, there is a clear hierarchy, right. And there's the skipper who's overall in charge, and that's a guy named Charlie Enright, who's a good friend of mine, also from Rhode Island. Who, young guy, very young to be in the position that he's in, and now I've sailed around the world with him twice, and I have an immense amount of respect for him. He was the overall skipper, along with another guy named Mark Towell, who was more of the general manager of the team. Charlie had ultimate say on the boat, but Mark was shared responsibilities overall in the campaign. And Mark is from Oahu, from Hawaii. So basically my job on board was to make sure that the boat's functioning at all time. I'm essentially the engineer. So anything breaks, it usually goes through me first. There are other guys that are also extremely capable at different roles, but overall I'd kind of be charged with making sure the boat's always running at its optimum limit, and then I also with everything in the Volvo, you have to be able to do several different things, and I'm also the bowman So I do all the stuff in the front of the boat, getting the sails up and down and whatnot.
Right.
But again, you're essentially sailing a 65-foot boat, very high performance 65-foot boat, shorthanded.
Right.
We're sailing with 8, so you got to be able to do everything. And I did a lot more driving in this race than I'd done in previous races, which was great for me.
Yeah.
But also a big learning curve.
Yeah. So take us through a day. I mean, you guys are running 24/7, as you mentioned, 16, 18 days. Some of these legs are 7,000 miles plus over super intense water. So what's a normal 24-hour period like on board?
Well, it can be the full spectrum of emotions. And I think this race is actually probably tougher emotionally and mentally than it is physically sometimes. Really? Yeah. Cause I can tell you that we would have, 3 to 5 days in a row going through a, massive low pressure in the Southern Ocean, in which you're, basically dealing with 50-foot swells and, 55 plus knot squalls with snow in them. But that's some of the best sailing we do, and some of the most fun we have. Very, very dangerous at times, and can be very scary, but also some of the most exhilarating sailing.
Yeah.
But I could say, mentally, it's just some of the most challenging stuff is, sitting in the middle of the Indian Ocean for 2.5, 3 days straight, averaging, 20 miles a day.
Yeah. Going nowhere.
In no wind.
Oh.
Going nowhere. I remember one of the worst times was in the Indian Ocean, being able to hear planes at 40 plus thousand feet.
No way. It was that quiet.
It was that quiet, and we couldn't really figure it out. And then we just saw this little streak across the top, and we were way out there.
Yeah.
And we just couldn't believe it.
Wow. What a spectrum of, I guess, situation where, you mentioned you've got 50-foot seas, 50-knot winds, and it's gnarly, it's burly, and you're going so intense. There's emotions and a mental state there. And then the other side of the equation is it's warm, it's hot, it's calm, it's glassy, and it's really nice, but you're not really moving, and still it's a different sort of state of emotion. So is that like a big part of the success of a team, is for everybody on board to just stay with it the whole time?
100%.
Yeah.
Staying again, that stuff when you're in the horse latitudes, in the equator and near the equator, a lot of those drifting scenarios are what's so difficult to keep a team focused and still racing minute by minute. And the last 2 editions of the race had one design fleet, so all the boats were the same.
Right.
It essentially came down. There was no personal innovation from the teams to the boats. You essentially signed up for the race, had your money, had your team, and you came in and you bought one of their Volvo Ocean 65s. And so you would literally be drag racing across oceans, which in previous editions of the race, it was kind of, attrition where you would, hold on for as long. You'd push the boat and the people as hard as you could without breaking. And if you broke, you were done.
Yep.
Whereas these boats were bricks and still very fast, but really. And so you'd be drag racing within sight of the entire fleet for almost an entire ocean crossing, which, is mentally very difficult.
Oh, man.
It is, seeing that boat, hour after hour for 15 plus days next to you.
Yeah.
It's pretty,
you can never relax.
You're in the cuckoo house a lot of those days.
Wow. So minutes matter, really, when it comes down to it. Like, everybody's got to be fully functional 24/7 from the start to finish.
Yeah, absolutely. I can't tell you how many legs were decided in the last 100 meters.
No way.
Of it. You'd race for, again, 15, 18 days, and it would get decided in the last 100 meters,
That's amazing.
You're finishing, minutes, if not seconds apart, very often.
Wow. So super stressful, super intense, exhilarating. So give us like an idea of, I mean, in your own words, describe what it's like. I mean, I'm like super infatuated with the Southern Ocean, just understanding what that water's like. So I have no idea, right? 50-foot seas, 50-knot winds for multiple days. I mean, what is that like? Are you just getting drilled constantly? And, describe that.
So, like with anywhere, with the North Atlantic, with South Pacific, with anywhere, it's seasonal. And, the Southern Ocean, obviously, just, packs a pounding. And when, all the great swells that, we surf all over the world, everything that's kicking up in the Southern Hemisphere, all that stuff in Indonesia, all the great swells in Australia and New Zealand, all that stuff is conjured up from the South. And essentially it's just low pressures circling Antarctica. And as the season progresses into, their winter, our summer, in the Northern Hemisphere, those storms intensify. And if you push it too late in the season, it can get really, really heavy. Yeah. And we were with this race, because we do an Asian stopover. We went to Hong Kong. There's a lot of parts of the Volvo that are very commercially driven, and it becomes really difficult to plan a race around the commercial side when it's very, seasonal based in terms of when you can be in certain areas. And that goes for light air as well. You send us to some places, at a season in which, there's no wind, then, the race ultimately suffers. This past one was a very difficult one. We had a beautiful crossing from South Africa to Melbourne, Australia. And that was a deep dive, I think 16 days or so. We got in Christmas Day to Melbourne. Beautiful sailing. Just that classic Southern Ocean ripping, where you are just downwind and really on the step and just absolutely hauling the metal.
Yeah, having fun.
Day in, day out, even sunny days. You got albatrosses are like seagulls down there.
Yeah.
And you're just, you can't really believe how lucky you are sometimes ripping through those areres, but you get sharp reminders when some of those squalls come through as to where you are and how far you are from any help. That leg, not as scary, because there's a lot of islands in between. A lot of fishing islands. You don't necessarily see them, but you know that they're there. But the second Southern Ocean leg, which was from New Zealand to Brazil, was a very difficult one this year. Right. And we there was a guy lost overboard on Scallywag. Wow. Who was never recovered. Right. Who was a friend of all of ours, and a brother in the race. Wow. And then we had rounded up after that. Scallywag had pulled out of the race after doing a pretty extensive search for fish. That was his name, John Fisher, and they weren't able to turn him up. Man. They headed into Chile, into a place called Puerto Montt, where I've actually been 2 races ago, because we broke a mast, or excuse me, we compressed our hull and basically had to pull out of the race. Really cool place. That's another beauty of this race, is all the it's a true adventure race. You end up in places that you would never imagine, really, and sometimes never heard of. And you have to make do with what you got. Right. So you'll pull off, find a spot to make a fix or repair to get back in the race. Yeah, or you may even have to. 2 editions ago, we had to get a ship, put the boat onto a ship and send it around to Brazil through. Oh, wow. Yeah. and we all flew to Brazil.
Jeez. So this year, on Lake 7 you're talking about, you guys had a problem with your mast, right? Can you take us through that?
Yeah. So the big, the big hallmark of that leg and the kind of a huge moment in anybody's life as a sailor, I'd say probably anybody's life who spends any time in the ocean would be rounding Cape Horn.
Right.
And that's obviously, think of it, the Drake's Passage between Antarctica and Tierra del Fuego and Cape Horn as being the compression spot of all these lows, got to then fit through that doorway. So obviously it accelerates on that platform a lot, and not to mention the continental shelf right there. So those 50, 80 foot swells that have been circling Antarctica, they eventually double up on those.
Really?
And it becomes pretty fruity out there.
Wow. So when you enter that spot, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. No, I was saying when we came around, that was, we were in second place. We had the French-Chinese team behind us, Dongfang, very close, I don't know, within 15 miles. Wow. But getting around that, you kind of start to breathe easy and start your trek north. The way the weather was setting up there, we were kind of going to do a slow arc around, and instead of doing the direct Straits of Le Maire passage north, we kind of arced around, and we were in a drag race with Dongfang. They caught up to us because we had some issues getting a sail off the lock and had to bleed some miles to them. And next thing you know, we're in a drag race with them, and they got quarter of a knot, half a knot faster on us, and we're trying to figure out a lot of things, but nothing crazy. I think it was 25 to 28 knots. Yeah. 6 to 8 foot sea. So it was all manageable. And then pop, our rig just snapped.
Wow.
Right at the first spreader. And that was us. We had to cut the rig, the boom, everything away from the boat at that point, because it was enough of a choppy sea state that it was starting to send the rig back into the boat, which would breach the hull. And
not good.
Yeah. So then it was knives and angle grinders and everything out. And,
wow. So when that happened, I mean, you hear the pop, you look up, and you as the engineer, does everybody immediately look to you as the guy to assess the damage and then basically, see what you can do to repair it?
I think everybody looked at me because I was trimming the main when it happened. But no, we at that point, everybody's been through this before, really. Who's on one of these boats in one way or another. Got it. And we know that it's nobody's fault. It's a very high compression, and the dynamic loads at that sail setup, at that configuration, is probably the most loaded the rig can ever be. And there was actually precedence for it. Matt Frey, the Spanish team, before the race had started, before the entire race had started, had dropped their rig in practice with that same sail configuration. Yeah. So we know that that's a very loaded setup. And, these things happen. And everybody swings into gear pretty quickly. That's why I love the Volvo. There's a lot of different, amazing Grand Prix sailing events in the world, but the Volvo is a very special one because everybody's extremely talented, extremely, kind of hardcore. It's, it's kind of the Navy SEALs equivalent of the sailing world, and the solo stuff and a lot of the French multi-hull stuff. Yeah. But everybody, as we say, kind of likes a shit fight. Right. And, we found probably a little too many in this last edition.
More than you wanted.
Yeah. But that kicked off, dropping the rig there. We were 100 miles east of the Falklands, and that kicked off a pretty big adventure there. Right. We considered ourselves lucky. If we had dropped it a week earlier, we would have been at Nemo, Yeah, we would have been, between New Zealand and South America, which when I had 2 editions ago had issues with another team. We found out that we were at exactly the point, which is called Point Nemo, which is the furthest from land you can get on Earth.
Oh, yeah.
And the closest thing to you is actually a man-made thing to you is the space station.
Yeah. How's that?
I mean, it doesn't really change anything until somebody tells you and you're like,
yeah.
Okay. You're 4 days, 5 days from even a ship probably attempting something at you. So it's game on if things happen out there.
So after having done, sailed around the world a couple times, does your perspective change? Like if you can compare what you just went through, which I believe was your 3rd time going around, to the first, is the water different? Are you more confident? Or is it just always so variable and challenging? It doesn't matter if you've done it once or 10 times. It's just the ocean's always constantly throwing new things at you.
No, you definitely notice your comfortability in those situations. I mean, I think you also hit a ceiling in that. There's certain times and places where you're at. There's no way you could ever get used to it.
Right.
55 plus knots in the Southern Ocean while it's snowing and it's pitch black, and you're doing, upwards of 30 knots.
Wow.
Nobody could get used to that.
Right.
That's just scary and sometimes feels pretty stupid.
Yeah.
But you're there, and so you might as well, kind of channel the adrenaline and kind of, get the cowboy going in you.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't tell you how many nights we would just celebrate at the end of every wave.
Really?
You'd be, patting the back of the driver, just saying, good one. Thanks for making that one.
Yeah. Yep.
Because you get to the end of one of those and you Chinese, it's a bad situation.
Right. And then you just get ready for the next one. It's coming, but you just one at a time.
When.
Yeah.
We would usually do an hour. Sometimes the better performing drivers will do upwards of 2 hours. But even the best guys we were sitting around a half hour, 40 minutes maybe, and I wasn't one of the best guys, but they would be alternating, and I was getting a lot of reps.
Yeah.
And that's how you know that it's pretty bad out there.
Right. And so you guys take breaks, or you switch so frequently just to give, what is it, a physical rest to that guy driving, or is it more of a mental rest?
So at that point, you're in a pretty reduced sail configuration, and you're really running because of the water pressure over the deck and where the weight needs to be in the boat. You're all in the back of the boat. Yeah. And then it gets to a certain point where there's so much wind, and the swells, the surfs are so long that you're really not doing a whole lot of trimming. You're kind of just hanging on. And so it becomes somebody on the back pedestal, which is the grinder, which rotates the winch, somebody holding the main sheet, and then somebody driving. And it gets to a certain point where the person who's trimming the main and the person who's grinding just can't really hang on. So then it becomes just all about the driver.
Got it.
And if something really bad goes wrong, if you're good on the main sheet, you can save the day.
Yeah.
But other than that, you're at that point redundant. The boat is, fully under control of the ocean.
Yeah. And you're hanging on.
Yeah. It's just your apparent goes so far forward that it's a whole new game.
Yeah.
And when it's pitch black and the driver has to focus on a tower of numbers, of red changing numbers.
Wow.
And he's essentially blind.
Yeah.
Can't see anything. We have these little clear goggles with 100 different things that we try every race that none of them ultimately work that well. We wear those gaff helmets sometimes. Those can be good, but if it fogs up and you're in the middle of a surf, it's really dangerous.
Right. So the way, So what you're describing, I mean, it's intense endurance. And so, a lot of folks I have on the show is, we'll train and do like a paddle or something between a couple islands of, Hawaii. It's a 7, 8, 10 hour ordeal. But what you guys are talking about is you're going hard for 2 weeks straight, So how do you prepare for that? I mean, what's the training to get you and the crew, I guess physically and mentally prepared to go about that? Because that's intense, that's a high caliber of endurance, mindset and physical athlete,
Yeah, I think it's all, progressing these days. When I first got involved with the Volvo, there was a high priority in guys being real big coming in. They wanted everybody real, jacked up and strong. And that's mostly because half of our life, the most hatred generated on these boats is from moving what's called the stack, which is everything that we have on board, all of our spares, all of our food, which is freeze-dried food. So it's fairly compressed and in very heavyweight bags. All of our everything that we have, all of our foul weather gear, tools, spares, food, and sails have to be moved every time we change directions.
Oh, geez.
So the leeward side of the boat is completely empty.
Right.
And so you're moving upwards of, a couple tons of gear every time you change.
Wow.
And you could, last Southern Ocean, I think we had, in a 24-hour period, 25 jibes.
Jeez.
Which, is backbreaking stuff.
Right.
So the mentality years ago was to get everybody pretty strong. But what they found is that, as you come into these things all jacked up and then you go spend 20 days at sea where you're only doing a couple thousand steps on a boat.
Yeah.
Yes, you're working hard, but you're doing it in a very different way. You're still burning upwards of, 7,000, 8,000 calories.
Yeah.
But a lot of that's because you're not sleeping. At best you're getting 3 hours, 15 minutes at it. That's very best. You're getting 3 hours, 15, 3 hours, 20.
Yeah.
And so they started seeing guys actually just really decline, and that muscle turned to fat quickly. And then it was harder to stay at, kind of peak mental and physical levels. So then it became more of a focus on having everybody core stability and cardio fit.
Right.
I guess the closest thing to it is kind of the high alpine climbing world. I've talked to several climbers and there's a lot of similarities between it. But it's, what, in the end, the time on the water, the more time you have out in shitty situations, the more equipped you are mentally and physically to handle it.
Yeah. Yeah. I bet.
And that's the reality of it. That's why a lot of those, you're talking to a guy from Brittany, why all of those guys are so talented. They live and breathe it out there.
Yeah. It's,
and they're crazy bastards. I mean, some of those guys, what they're doing is radical on those multi-hulls. I mean, I've done very little in the French multi-hull world, but I know that those guys are they're pushing the boundaries of what the human body can do out there. The technology is beyond what the body can take, basically.
Right. So what was it like for you, kind of rewinding a little bit? What was it like for your first experience in the ocean race? I know you were, was it a photographer to start on board?
No, I was, my first race was, I was shore crew for Puma Ocean Racing in 2008, 2009 race. So I was one of the kind of technicians that travels around fixing the boats.
Yep.
And I came from the sailing background of it. The next race, I was aiming to try and sail in the race. I was the boat captain of the training boat living in Abu Dhabi in the United Arab Emirates. And I was essentially going to be trying out. I had blown my knee out. And and wasn't really going to have the opportunity. They had a few other guys in mind as well that were more experienced. But the skipper, Ian Walker, who was the previous last race's winner, he had asked me, I'd worked with them for over a year now, and said, we still want to have you on the boat. Would you ever consider trying to pick up a camera and document it? Because there was a role on board that was called the media crew member,
right?
In which you got to document it, which is a really, really probably the hardest job I've ever done in the Volvo.
Really?
Yeah, that is an extremely difficult job. I mean, not to mention I didn't know anything about video, and I've done very, very limited photography, and I'm a terrible writer. So I really had no business being in there, especially amongst some of the other guys who are so talented out there, Hamish Hooper and Amory Ross and all these guys who are incredibly talented, reporters and photographers and videographers. I was just kind of a dude, and
but you could sail too, right? So is that part of the picture?
Well, but you weren't allowed to sail.
Okay.
You were, and that was probably the most difficult thing for me, was not being able to.
You're just watching. You're documenting.
Yeah. But it was a great group of guys, and guys that I'd worked with in the past, and it was all worth it in the end. But at the end of it, I put down the camera and was ready to go sailing again. That's for sure.
For sure. So then rewind even further. Talk about just your background growing up, and how you got from just being a kid on the water, how you were introduced to the water. I know your family's got a rich history with a boatyard, and I was looking at some of the pretty rad, lobster boats and other boats that you guys are working on. So, but take us from just being a kid growing up to the point where you're in your 20s, even being able to entertain the idea of jumping into the Volvo. Just take us through that.
So I grew up in Newport, Rhode Island, and that's a very, very big in our sailing world, and in our sport. There's 3 or 4 cities around the world that are kind of the meccas, or like meccas for sailing, and Newport's definitely one of them. And a lot of really, some of the best sailors in the world come out of there. And growing up there, you're kind of just, you're in it.
Yeah.
It's like,
right in the middle.
Growing up in Huntington Beach, or, something, there's a lot of ways in which you can get involved. And, there's really good youth schemes of small boat dinghy sailing that can drive you towards the Olympics, that can drive you towards big boat sailing. I didn't do as much of those. I was actually much more involved in other sports. But my family, my dad and mom did a lot of cruising, and we would go. My family we would all go cruising. We'd go all the way up to Newfoundland and Nova Scotia, all the way down to the bottom of the Bahamas. And they've been doing it forever, just the two of them. And back then, when we were all young enough, it was easy enough to take us.
Right.
So I came about it from a much more mechanical standpoint. My dad, the boat, I always kind of, watched what he was doing and learned from a lot of what he was doing, keeping a boat just running.
Right.
Simple stuff, but stuff that can, rinse and repeat. And then the shipyard's now 20 years on, that my family's been involved in it. And, growing up through there, you certainly learn a lot about how to fix a boat, and a lot about how a boat should be maintained and what makes them tick. And then when I was, kind of on my way out of college, I got an opportunity to go work to be the nipper, to be the Grom for Puma Ocean Racing. Ken Reed gave me an opportunity, and I went around the world and worked with a lot of really talented guys. And from there, that was kind of foot in the door, and it's what you make of it from there. And that's the
Yeah.
beauty of the Volvo is there's no clear path to it.
Right.
But if you, it's a sink or swim thing. And if you put yourself in enough predicaments and make them out and make it out in a good manner, you're on your way.
Right. Right.
And you gotta, there's a lot of egos, a lot of intense personalities,
Yep.
A lot of really terrible situations, and you either make it or you don't.
Right.
And it's kind of the beauty of it. It's a traveling circus that is one big family as well.
Yeah.
And for me at that point, it was pretty cool. There was not many Americans involved, and I was, 20 years old, getting paid to, fly around the world and fix this boat.
That's so cool.
And ended up in the coolest places and had a couple surfboards in the container. And,
Did it right.
I was living pretty fast and loose between the stopovers. And, it was definitely a wild ride.
Right on.
And,
that's cool. So how about then, like back to the endurance piece, which is, at some point you saw your path into the Volvo was, becoming more clear and strong. And at some point you probably had to ask yourself, do I have what it takes to do that, to be on that boat for 14, 16 days, So how does that go back to your upbringing and, or just, I don't know, toughness in general? I mean, were you ready? Were you psyched? Were you ever kind of timid or hesitant about committing? Or were you just down from the start to go in and be able to do a couple of weeks at sea with these guys?
Well, the interesting thing there's no real gentle lead up to a leg in the Volvo. I mean, any blue water race that you do in the world, Sydney to Hobart, Newport to Bermuda, transatlantics, whatever, you're talking at most a transatlantic, being, on the boats that I would have been trying to do it on, a great crossing would have been 10 days,
right,
or 11 days or something. That still doesn't compare at all to a Volvo leg.
Yeah.
A Volvo leg is just, you don't know until you do it.
Right.
And there's a lot of guys who are, far better sailors than me that, coming from the Olympics or coming from the America's Cup and, have a go, and they're one and done. They finish that leg and they're like,
it.
Not for me. That is, so you kind of got to have that cowboy and again, really kind of enjoy a shit fight, because no matter what, you're going to have some problems.
Right.
out there.
Right.
And that's not for everybody.
Yep.
A lot of guys are so focused on the racing side of it and the performance side of it that breakages really just break their mind. They can't really handle that. And that's fair enough. You need to have a balance between those guys on board. I think when we ended up in the Falklands after breaking the rig, there was part of our team that just kind of switched off because the racing was over, and then there was another part of our team that kind of, we all lit up and we were like, this is going to be nuts.
Yeah.
And building a rig out of a telephone pole in the Falklands for a few days was a pretty interesting adventure. But there was, some of the guys, they've been in it a long time and they're like, I'm not here to do this anymore. I'm here to race.
Yeah. That's right. You guys fix it.
Everybody battles with that.
Right.
Yeah, no. And saying that, you will have people that do that, but they will always put in.
Yeah.
They will always be there when you need them and stuff. So I don't mean to say that any of these people weren't helping, because they were. Everybody was putting in equally. But, there are some people that you can see are totally dejected and broken, as you should be. You're in a 9-month race to try to win this.
Yeah, you've been working hard.
But there's, also some weird guys like me and a couple others that really kind of enjoyed our time there.
Yeah. And for folks listening, what Nick's referring to, there's a great video that I watched. I'll put a link in the show notes of basically chronicling you guys pulled in with no mast to this town, and the community rallied around you guys. Yeah. And it's just a cool, 10-ish minute video. I'll link it. It's pretty rad. And you got you guys back on the water. It's pretty cool, really cool. So a couple other pieces then, Nick. So talk about, you grew up in the water, but you're surfing. There's, you're in Hawaii, you're in the Bahamas. Talk about just surfing, and is that like just how does that relate for you to the sailing? Is it just a total easy, mellow, fun, alternative to some of the gnarly stuff you're doing day to day in the ocean?
No, I mean, a lot of times I'm totally freaked out and, putting myself in positions with waves that I probably don't have any business in.
Yeah.
You feel comfortable in the ocean, and then you end up in some of these spots. And
right.
You're like, oh my God, you're fighting for your life on a sunny day. And, but I love it. I wish I was much better at surfing. But I love every minute of it. And as soon as I'm done with sailing, that's all I want to be doing.
Right.
But it's a whole different experience. And, it's funny. I was talking to, Ian Walsh was with us for the, stopover in Newport, and was staying with me at my house. And, we talk about the difference in it, and he's now recently become very interested in sailing, and
really
started doing some ocean passages, and he kind of expressed that he was in awe of what we do, and I was like, man, you have no idea.
Right.
Like, it is, I look at what you guys do as just completely mental. But it is cool to put it all together, to think of what we're out there, ripping down the face of is ultimately going to be something that somebody else is going to capitalize on, 100 feet offshore.
Right.
And it's pretty cool in that regard.
That's way cool. And then how about some of your project boats? I know you probably don't have too much downtime, but back at the family shipyard, you're working on boats. Looks like you just, not maybe just, but restored, these really pretty cool, lobster boats. Talk about that. Is that just a really something you grew up doing and continue to do?
Yeah, a little bit. So up in New England, especially out of Maine, there's old lobster boats. Not all of them are old. The last one I did was from 2013, but it's a lobster boat design. We call them down east shapes. And basically this last one I did was you can find these things all over the place. I always say this should be like a discovery show where you go find these. I found it from about 50 miles inland in New Hampshire with a hay farmer. It was in his yard. He used it as a tuna boat, but it's from this designer called Glenn Holland, who it's like Shapers. He's an amazing designer and builder, but this is a guy who just does it out of his backyard in Limestone, Maine, or I can't remember the town. But he has been doing it for 40, 50 years. There's nothing complex about it, but he has a beautiful shape to his hulls. This guy lives and breathes racing these things. They get these boats up to 60 knots.
Really?
I mean, it's some awesome redneck activities. But there's a desire to kind of convert those things into picnic boats. And they have a great platform for it. They got a big open aft cockpit, and you can put a picnic table in them. You can have nothing in them. You can have bean bags in them.
Wow.
But one thing's for sure is everybody wants to end up having beers on the lobster boat over the Hinckley at the end of the day. And so I started, I'd done one, a 1974 wooden lobster boat that I'd had for years, the Spruce, and we'd had great times. We'd taken it down to the bottom of the Bahamas, surfing and spearfishing, and had some pretty crazy adventures on it. And I did another one because some people had asked me over the years to, would I ever consider doing another, and they'd be interested, and so I just did one on spec and sold it before I finished with it. A guy came in and really loved that shape and was just like, I'm in. And
cool.
and then so it's kind of it was a proof of concept. My brother's done it, my sister's done it. It was proof of concept in whether you could make a little money out of it.
Mm-hmm.
I think you can. But right now I don't even have the time to do another project. I desperately want to, but just no time.
Yeah, no, it looks cool. The pictures, these things are absolutely gorgeous, gorgeous boats. So then, Nick, man, what's next? So I know you said the Volvo is kind of in a period of transition as it turns over every few years. What's kind of next for you, man? What's the next few years looking like?
So when you're either not on a big campaign, you go and you kind of do what we call mercenary style, where you're going and sailing for private owners, doing different events. That's where I'm going to France tonight to go sail with a team that's just doing an event, a week-long event there. And it's a great, that's the thing, is the world's very small. We go, we show up, we know all the guys, we know all the guys on every one of the boats. But a skipper puts together the team, we all come sail. It's a lot of fun. And it's really good racing, and it can be a variety of different classes. So I've got a few of those. I'm going to go down and do the Sydney to Hobart in the day after Christmas out of Sydney, which is, a blast. Such a fun race. And then kind of working my way towards, trying to get on the boat with an America's Cup team.
Yeah, rad.
And give that a go. I've always kind of been in the Volvo side, but now might be an opportunity to get in that. It's kind of the rally versus F1. Yeah. And if I can cross over, that would be pretty cool.
Yeah.
So kind of making a go at that and hopefully get an opportunity.
Yeah, and have some fun in between. Keep surfing, keep working on boats here and there.
Oh yeah, I wish. Surfing's the main one. We had a good swell off of Hurricane Florence.
Oh, did you up there? Yeah,
everybody was pretty pumped about that.
Oh yeah, man.
It's tis the season
for sure. Well, it's
Rhode Island.
Dead flat out here. I'm in Santa Cruz, and it's been flat for months, man. So we're dying.
I was out there a couple weeks ago.
Oh,
it was
cool.
Flat.
Yeah, way too flat. Well, hey, so Nick, I really appreciate you sharing so much, man. This has been a ton of fun, and wish you the best of luck just with the next races coming up, getting into America's Cup and everything.
Thanks, man. I really appreciate it. It's a very cool podcast.
Right on. Well, thank you so much. Well, so I appreciate it, Nick, and I will link to a bunch of different Instagram and other things, in the show notes. But man, I just want to thank you and wish you the best of luck in the future.
Okay, very much appreciate it.
Right on. Thank you.